My name is Laura Stoner, and I'm here with Colonel Jamie Totten and Dr. Emily Raymond, and we are talking about Mr. Totten's service in the military during the Vietnam War. It is July 12th, 2023, and we are on StreamYard recording this interview. Okay, can you start by telling me your full name?
Yeah, my full name is James Patton Totten.
So is your middle name, does that have a military um
Yeah,
leaning, or
yes, it does.
can you tell me about that connection?
Uh, well, my grandfather Patton was in the Army. You may have heard of him. His name was George Smith Patton.
Oh.
Um, Also, my uncle, who's another George Smith Patton, as well as my father, my paternal grandfather's great grandfather, great great grandfather. So they all have Army connotations.
Mm-hmm. And where were you born?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts,
And what year and date, like the date of your birth?
uh, May 15th, 1947.
And so what are your parents' names?
What am I? What?
Your parents' names again.
My father's name was James Willoughby Totten. My mother's name was Ruth Ellen Patton Totten.
And did they work outside of the home?
My mother didn't. My father was in the Army.
Okay. And did he served in World War II?
Yes, he did.
He served in the Army? You're a very Army focused family?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And then when you went to school, where did you go to high school?
I went to the Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia.
And that was a boarding school kind of situation.
That's correct.
And was that kind of your first introduction to Virginia, or did your military background bring you to Virginia beforehand?
Well, in a way, I mean, my father was stationed at the Pentagon several times when I was growing up. So we lived in Washington, D.C., which, close to Northern Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
But my first introduction, real introduction to Virginia was when I went away to school.
Mm-hmm. And what age did you start boarding school?
I think I was 14.
And did you like it?
I'm not sure. I am not a dedicated alumni. That's what you mean.
Uh-huh. Did it help you? Now, you said you wanted to go to West Point.
Originally, yes, I did.
So did the boarding school kind of?
No, I didn't get into. I was not admitted at West Point.
Yeah, but like, did the boarding school kind of make you think this is the kind of lifestyle that I want to pursue? I mean, like, did the boarding school kind of create an
Well,
environment where you were like, I want more of this, or?
I knew what the lifestyle was like because I grew up in it, but
Mhm.
but I don't think the boarding school was anything like the military lifestyle.
Okay. But you said that the reason why you didn't go to West Point was because you were disqualified for vision,
That's
right?
correct. Yeah.
And so, because you were considered legally blind.
I don't know what's 2400.
Okay.
Whatever that is. That's what my prescription was.
So then how did you find your way to VMI after that?
My father's father uh, fought in the Philippine insurrection. He was part of the New York Volunteer Regiment, Philippine insurrection, and he was friends with a guy named Charles Kilbourne, who was a VMI grad and eventually became the superintendent of VMI. And General Kilbourne was one of the few, or maybe the only, Medal of Honor winner in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And he and my grandfather were very good friends. So when things didn't work out for West Point, my grandfather suggested I try VMI. I didn't realize at the time that I had about I'm about a fifth generation VMI guy also. My
Oh,
great
wow.
grandfather went to VMI, so, and his son and my grandfather went to VMI for a year. So I was not aware of the family connection until I was reminded by it by the fundraiser, who thought it was a great idea for me to participate in continuing the legacy. So at any rate,
Um, so how you entered into VMI at what year?
61. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, would be 65. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. And your goal is to enter into the military and have a career.
Yeah, that was my intent.
Okay. And what did you major in at VMI?
It was civil engineering.
Do you have any particular memories about your time at VMI? You know, people that you went to school with, you know, that were in your class, um, you know, just the general. I guess you said that you had been preparing your whole life in a military lifestyle, so it wasn't jarring to go to VMI.
Well, that's kind of an understatement. It was very jarring to go to VMI as a rat.
Do you have, you know, how many people, could you say like how many people of your class made it to graduation?
I think we graduated a little over half the class.
So if you made it to the end, you really survived something.
Yes.
So then Vietnam is starting. So you guys, the idea, you don't have to serve if you're at VMI, but it's definitely something that it's going to be happening. Did you have a sense of like, oh, maybe this conflict will be over by the time I graduate? Or were you hoping that you would get to Vietnam?
I just, based on the situation, I think I and my classmates just assumed that if we went on active duty, we would end up in Vietnam within a year, which was true for those of us who went on active duty. I mean, I graduated in May of '69, and I was on an airplane headed for Vietnam in May of '70.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to recruiting at VMI, you just went straight to the Army and enlisted. You didn't, or you know, got your commission. You didn't look at any other branches of service.
VMI at the time, VMI cadets were required to take reserve officers training either with the Air Force or the Army. They still had to take the courses in ROTC, in the Army ROTC, but you could commission in the Marine Corps. So VMI was a path to commissioning for three services: the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
But you were required to take ROTC, even if you weren't medically qualified. I mean, I had friends and classmates that were had physical disabilities that would prevent them from serving that still had to take ROTC, and it still showed up on your transcript. It affects your grade.
So ROTC is that separate from the training at VMI? Like you would do it on the weekend?
Have you ever been to VMI?
Not physically.
Okay. Yeah, VMI is a military school, so it's run on a military format. Everybody wears a uniform. Everybody marches, or when I was there, we marched to class, we marched to meals, we marched to church. We had scheduled lights out and breakfast formations and all of those things, which is just like the Army. 1 hour a week, we took ROTC.
Okay.
And we marched to ROTC. So
it wasn't much of a change.
Pardon me?
It wasn't much of a change from what your life was like at that time.
VMI, which wasn't much of a change. VMI, the Army was not much of a change from VMI.
Yeah, the ROTC training was not much of a change from the VMI
Oh, he
education.
was embedded in the VMI.
Yeah. Okay. So you graduate in 69
I did.
and then you start your specialized training and you go to Fort Bragg,
Fort Benning.
Fort Benning.
The way it worked in those days, and the way I think it still works, was that when you're commissioned, you go to the first school you go to is a basic course for your branch. In my case, it was the infantry officer's basic course at Fort Benning.
Mm-hmm.
And those are
in Georgia.
generally about 9 weeks long. From there, you go to your first unit of assignment, and you're assigned a job. In my case, I was a platoon leader, and you do whatever the unit's doing.
So what was the unit doing
What was
in
my unit doing? My unit was training.
So they were training.
To the infantry soldiers jump out of airplanes.
How was the mood of the culture of the military at that point? You know that you're training to go overseas to combat.
We had in the 82nd, the enlisted men it was pretty even split between people who were just coming back from Vietnam and people who were about to go to Vietnam as an individual replacement. So the veterans, if they didn't intend to stay in the Army, couldn't wait to get out. I mean, they weren't terribly motivated. They'd all, they'd been to war and seen the elephant, and all they want to do is get an honorable discharge and go home. The people that hadn't been to Vietnam watched the veterans, and they, learned by example. So.
But I know you commented at one point in your survey about the individual replacement of soldiers and how that really kind of didn't serve the American mission very well.
Well, the way replacements were managed at that period of time was that the people in a unit were all had a different date for rotating out. You were there for a year, and then you rotated in. You were there for a year, and then you rotated out. And not everybody arrived at the same time, so you could pretty much bank on the fact that in any given unit on the ground, and I'm sure, I think this applies to all the different branches of the Army, you had people that had been there almost a year and people that had been there almost a day.
Mm-hmm.
And what that in combat, that means that about half your strength is experienced and the other half isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that detracts from your combat effectiveness. And so you had people, infantry company has a required strength of about 120 people. Our foxhole strength was somewhere around 90. Assigned foxhole strength is somewhere around 90, and usually had between 70 and 80 people actually with boots on the ground because of R&R and rotating in and rotating out and sickness and those kinds of things. So, but since that happened, or since Vietnam's been over, the Army has deployed troops to combat areas as units. So when you go to war in the 101st Division, for instance, if you get sent to Iraq or Afghanistan, you go with the people you've been training with for months and years. So you don't have to kind of learn by, there's not a lot of OJT. You've already done it. You've already learned how to do the things you need to do. And I think that makes for much more effective units.
Mm-hmm. Because you're learning to trust people kind of in the ground and on the field, rather than knowing everybody, all the personalities very well through the training.
Well, everything you do in combat, if your training's been effective, you've already done in training.
Yeah.
So it makes for a much more effective unit.
Okay, so you went to Panama to do training as well, right?
Yeah, the normal rotation for lieutenants when they were commissioned, if you were regular Army, the first year you went to Ranger School, Jump School, and could go to Jungle School en route to Vietnam, which is what I did.
Did you I know that you were training for war and that's a very serious matter, but did you enjoy ranger training and jump training? You know, from the thrill seeking kind of point of view? I assume that you have to be somewhat into thrills if you're jumping out of planes.
Um, it was just, it was a requirement of the job to they wanted you to be airborne training so they could send you to an airborne unit if they needed to. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were sort of getting their inventory up to speed, so to speak.
Yeah. And did you feel like the jungle training was particularly effective?
It was all effective.
Okay. Um, so you finished training. Had you been to South America before you went to Panama or left the country?
I was almost born in Panama. My father
Oh,
was stationed in the Canal Zone. The reason I was born in Boston is I was going to be a cesarean birth. My mother went back to Boston to the same doctor that had delivered my two older brother and sister. And interestingly enough, my grandson was doing a genealogy project in one of his history classes, and he found the manifest of my mother taking me and my sister back to Panama from Boston on a ship.
oh, that's
So
cool.
I was almost born in. I spent the first 1 or 2 years of my life in Panama. I also lived in Brazil. My father was stationed in Rio, and I went to Brazil from school on vacation.
Oh, so there wasn't a foreign feeling when you were there.
Where, in Rio?
No, in Panama. I mean, you were one to
Well,
two, but
yeah, Panama. I mean, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Panama is, at the time, was a third world nation, so it felt different.
yeah. So from Panama, you go to Vietnam.
Right.
Do you have any initial impressions about your arrival there? It's another third world country, um, but people talk about the smells and the heat and the wetness and the rain. Do you have any feelings of what you felt like when you got off the plane?
Well, it's interesting. I landed in Benoit, was the Air Force base where I got off the plane, and it had been in different times since since the World War II. It had been managed by the French, managed by the Vietnamese. So we drove in the bus from the Benoit Air Base over to the replacement center next door. You went by a lot of really old fortifications that had been put up by the French, maybe put up by the U.S. Army, and 5 years ahead of before. All the buses had wire mesh on the windows, so they couldn't throw a grenade through an open window. It was sort of semi-hostile, very hot and humid. I don't specifically recall a smell, but it was very hot and humid, and it rained a lot during the wet season. So
And
my first reaction on the bus when I looked out the window was, "This is just like the movies," and it kind of sort of was.
so then you get processed, and then I assume they take you out to the fire base.
Yeah, what they did, what we did, you went to the replacement center and they assigned you against a vacancy at one of the at one of the divisions, one of the infantry divisions in country. In my case, I was assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division. My VMI, my brother Rat VMI, and my former roommate from VMI, and I went over on the same plane. He ended up in the 101st Airborne Division. So we went separate paths. The 1st Cav was just next door at in the Benoit Army Base. So we just went back over to Benoit, and I was assigned to the 1st Team Academy, which is a 1-week orientation that they do before they send you to the field. So I went through the FTA, which, interestingly enough, FTA is the acronym for F the Army. So I went to the FTA, or 1st Team Academy, and they taught us, they showed us what a Vietnamese bunker complex looked like, and we went on patrols, practice patrols and stuff like that. It was really just a repeat. For me, it was a repeat of all the training I'd already had, but a lot of guys that were in it with me, it's first time outside of basic and advanced training, that they hadn't seen, they'd seen a bunker in a mock bunker in the woods in Georgia, but they hadn't seen a real bunker in the jungle of Vietnam. So that was sort of what that was about. And while I was in going through that initial orientation training, I was assigned down to unit level. So I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 12th Cavalry, which was part of it's an infantry battalion. It was part of the 1st Brigade. That at the time I arrived, they were still in Cambodia. The Cambodian incursion was still going on.
Yeah. So you arrived in May, and that ended at the end of June. So did you get involved in any of that?
No, I didn't go to Cambodia. I had joined my unit. They'd walked out of Cambodia, and they're on a fire base, maybe 100 yards inside South Vietnam.
As like an incidental, had you heard about Kent State? Because that was
Kent State was going on. Kent State happened while I was on leave en route to Vietnam, and the My Lai massacre. The Lieutenant Calley was being tried at Fort Benning while I was at Fort Benning going through the basic course. So, we were very aware of what was going on in South Vietnam.
Did your family obviously was well prepared for you to go, right? Did they have any concerns? I know you're a military family, so it's just a part of the service, but sometimes moms can feel different than dads.
My father was deceased.
Okay.
I'm sure my mother worried. At one point, she said she had a dream and she saw me, and she knew it was me because she saw my VMI class ring on my hand. And she had the dream. She had that particular dream, as best we can triangulate it, the day I got shot in the leg. The bullet didn't pierce the skin because it hit something in my pants pocket. But that was a pretty hairy day for me, and that's the day when she had the dream. So I'm sure there's something to that.
Yeah, some sort of mental connection.
Right. So I know she worried. I mean, she went through. My brother was in Vietnam before me. My father was in World War II. I mean, she'd been through the drill more than once.
So when did your brother serve?
I think he was there in 67, 68.
Did he give you any advice before you left?
No.
How was his service? The thing that strikes me about Vietnam service is that some people, depending on their jobs and where they go, they can have a very, kind of like their lives did not change drastically. They didn't witness like massive violence. They were just somewhere else doing a job.
Right.
So was your brother's service very different from yours?
My brother was in military intelligence, and they were just experimenting with a new organization. So he was the commander of a military intelligence company in the 1st Infantry Division, and he was there during TET. I think he told me about running patrols through Long Binh during TET and after TET. I don't know how much time he actually spent in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you went to FTA school.
About 10 days. Then I flew from Benoit Army Base to a a large base area called Landing Zone Buttons, which was in Song Bay, which was a province a town on the Song Bay River, nestled right up against the Cambodian border.
Mm-hmm.
And by then I'd already been assigned to a unit. So when I got off the airplane at Song Bay, I was met by the personnel officer of the 12th of first to 12th. I spent a night, and he assigned me to a company. So I spent a night in the company's rear area and got on a helicopter the next morning. And that's when I was issued my rifle and all my field gear. So I kind of got that assembled. When I got to Vietnam, they issued me several sets of jungle fatigues. So when I got to my unit at Song Bay, I gave them all my jungle fatigues, and they went in a big pile. And I was issued a rucksack and a mosquito net, a rifle, and all of those kind of things. And we flew out to the landing or the fire base the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there, brand new shiny fatigues and brand new shiny jungle boots and a brand new shiny M16 and the new guy. They call them FNGs, funny new guys.
And then, so I assume that you were assigned to your platoon at that point.
Yeah. I was assigned to the 3rd platoon. The previous platoon leader had been reassigned, so he was still in the unit, but he was in a different unit, a different subunit. And so I was the platoon leader of the 3rd platoon of Delta Company.
So did you just immediately go out into the bush, or did they give you some time to get acclimated in the fire base?
Well, Delta Company was on the fire base when I arrived, and so we had a week on the fire base before they sent us off somewhere else. And that was a chance to get to know the troops, the guys in my platoon, and that sort of thing.
Was there, how was your platoon, the demographics of your platoon? How was that?
I was the oldest person in the platoon. I was 23. The next oldest guy was 22. We had all of the sergeants were shake and bake, which meant that if they excelled in their basic and individual unit training, they went into the NCO Academy. So they'd been in the Army about a year longer than I had.
Mm-hmm.
The enlisted men were all in their teens. I'd say pretty even split demographically from different parts of the U.S. A lot of people from the South, almost all draftees.
And how would you say the mood was of the platoon when you arrived?
I think they were in their hearts of heart. All they wanted to do was live through the next year, or however much time they had left in country.
Mm-hmm.
And these are teenage men, healthy, virile teenage men in combat. And I think they kind of relished that in a way, although the fact that they didn't want to get killed.
Mm-hmm.
I never had anybody hang back. I never had anybody refuse an order. I never had anybody get violent. It was a sort of an all for one and one for all situation.
Do
And
you?
they regarded me, and I regarded myself as a platoon leader. I was like a first among equals. I mean, they didn't call me by my first name; they called me LT for lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And I ate with them. I slept in the hooch with them. I mean, it was all, kind of like a big camping trip in a way.
Did you observe other lieutenants having different leadership styles that were maybe not so egalitarian?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not aware of any. There may have been lieutenants that were incompetent, and if they were, they would uh, initially rotate them out so they wouldn't get anybody killed.
Mm-hmm.
But all the lieutenants I knew were in the same situation I was.
So you spend your week at the fire base getting to know each other, and then you head out into the jungle on your missions.
Well, in my case, we were sent to have security at a radio relay site on top of a mountain outside of Song Bay, which was sort of a semi rear area.
Mm-hmm.
On a mountain called Nui Chao Chin, I think was the name of the mountain. And we spent a week in Nui Chao Chin as base security. We ran patrols around the outside of the radio site. And then from there, we went to the jungle.
Oh, okay. Did you see the enemy at the radio site at all, or was it?
No,
just...
we saw them rocket Song Bay. I mean, you could look down the hill and see the LZ buttons, and we saw them. We saw NVA rockets impacting in Song Bay, infrequently, but that was about the only indication we had of enemy action.
Okay. So then you go into the jungle.
Right.
And your goal is to ambush the enemy, right?
Well, ambush is a technique. Our mission was to close with and destroy the enemy.
Okay. So are you tracking them when you want to destroy the enemy?
That's an interesting question. The missions we would receive, the headquarters, division headquarters, brigade headquarters had made educated guesses as to where the enemy might be located. So they would send. We had 3 rifle companies in the 12th Cav,
Mm-hmm.
A, B, C, and D, and they would send a rifle company on what they called armed reconnaissance from one grid location to another, with the expectation that somewhere between point A and point B, if there was any enemy out there, we'd find them.
Mm-hmm.
That was a typical mission. So if we found signs of the enemy, then we, do what we could to engage them.
So what would be signs of the enemy? Were they trained to clean up their camp so that you couldn't find signs? Or
no, I mean, they are very clever at camouflaging. But they didn't, when they traveled on trails
mm-hmm.
that they made. And so the one sign would be if you crossed a trail, if you found a trail with frequent heavy use. They also built fighting positions and bunkers in the jungle, and so that it wouldn't look like someone had been building bunkers next door. They would they would not cut all the lumber for their bunkers in one place. So if you were wandering around in the bush and you found a couple of trees, maybe 50 yards apart, that had been sawed off, that was an indication that somebody had been building something with those trees. And if you were, 5 miles from the Cambodian border, that somebody was probably North Vietnamese. So
Did
you see
they?
different signs, and you could smell. The enemy had a very, very distinctive aroma, or their complexes did.
Mhm.
They cooked with wood, so you could smell wood smoke. So if you smelled wood smoke, that was a bad sign. But trails and evidence of logging and aroma of wood smoke, those kinds of things were the signs that you alerted on.
Did you all do anything to oh, wait, Emily wants to ask a question.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just curious if you ever found a large cache of supplies when you came out.
Yeah, well, yes and no. My unit had found a huge cache in Cambodia before I got there. After I arrived, we stumbled into a munitions factory where they were making directional anti-personnel mines. It had been recently abandoned, but we didn't find any cash, any of the product. Another time, we ran into a hospital compound. It had everything, including operating rooms. It had medical text written in French. It had 8mm film. It was a fully set up field hospital that had been evacuated just prior to our arrival. So we would, another time, we found what I would call a direct support maintenance facility for the North Vietnamese, where they actually had 5 kW generators and all that sort of thing, and drill presses and stuff. Another time we ran across another logistic site, which was full of pedal operated Singer sewing machines. And it was in a hooch. The roof of the hooch was made out of flattened out Jack's beer cans. They were making themselves at home.
So what did you do when you found these facilities? Did you just report them and then?
Well, yeah, we reported them, and if there was something usable left, we'd destroy it, deny its use to the enemy. If there was somebody in them, we'd destroy them with the people in them.
So, so the cycle was that you would go for 3 weeks in the bush and then 1 week back to the fire base.
Right. And while we were out, we'd get resupplied every 3 days.
Was that, and you would get mail at that point?
We'd get mail. Remember I told you we threw all our newly issued fatigues in a big pile before I left for the bush, where they'd bring out a couple duffel bags full of fatigues, and you'd find a pair of pants that fit and put your dirty ones back in the duffel bag. So we got clean uniforms about maybe every log, or at least every other log. Generally speaking, on log day, they'd fly in a hot meal, and they'd fly in the mail, any kind of resupply, ammunition. In the bush, we got something called a sundry pack, which was full of all the personal use stuff like toothpaste and toothbrushes and mail envelopes and that sort of thing. And so you get candy and cigarettes. So you distribute what was in the sundry pack to the platoon. I forget how many men a Sedgwick pack was supposed to support, but you get one or two, and you'd pass out the cigarettes and the candy and that sort of thing.
Did you smoke at the time?
I smoked heavily at the time.
Did you ever run low on supplies and have to kind of ration amongst yourselves?
No.
That's good.
Simple answer is no.
The Army was doing its job.
The meal ration was 2 C rations and a freeze dried long range reconnaissance patrol ration called Alert. So we get two C's and Alert for every day we were going to until the next log day, and most people didn't take all an entire C ration because each meal is about 2,000 calories, and you don't need 6,000 calories a day, even there. So they'd pick and choose what they wanted from their rations, and they'd either trade with somebody else or they'd poke a hole in the can and bury it. So there was never any shortage of food. What
would you say was the most desirable C ration amongst your platoon?
Well, everybody had a favorite. It was pretty limited. I think there were like 5 or 6 entrees. I can't remember what they were off the top of my head. I didn't dislike any of them.
I heard one person say that everybody liked the peaches, and maybe it was like peaches
and peaches. Everybody liked pound cake.
Peaches and pound cake. Yeah, that's what he said. But then he said that they had fruit cake, and nobody liked fruit cake, but he liked fruit cake.
I liked it.
So when did you I remember you told me that you first engaged with the enemy. Can you tell me about your first engagement with the enemy on your missions?
Well, this was the first mission we went on after we left Bui Chao Chin. We made what's called a combat assault to somewhere in the vicinity. I couldn't put my finger on the map. We made a combat assault into a clearing. We moved off the clearing and set up a night defensive perimeter. During the night, the enemy triggered one of our ambushes, and the next morning I led a patrol out to see what had happened, and we found one dead North Vietnamese. We got up and got ready to move out as a company size. Lead platoon. I was not in the lead platoon. The lead platoon started following a trail, which is not something you do. So the lead platoon started following a trail. They ran into an ambush. It took out pretty much the front end of the lead platoon. We had 4 people killed and 8 people wounded. That was because we were on a trail. So we went and policed up the kill zone, evacuated the wounded and the dead, and then moved out the next day looking for whoever we'd run into the day before. And we found a quite large, well-established base camp. The embers and the fires that they were cooking on was still warm when we got there. So that was a sort of a watershed moment for me. I never walked a trail again.
It seems like the path of least resistance is probably one of the more dangerous routes to take in Vietnam. If it's well traveled, then you don't want to go that way.
Well, they they lived in the jungle. We were just visitors. So they basically, they traveled on trails.
Yeah.
And if you found one, you pretty much count on the fact that there was some enemy nearby. All of our engagements happened on a trail.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a follow-up to
Yeah.
that? So if you did find a trail, then what would the better alternative be as opposed to following it?
If we found a trail, depending on what our mission was, we'd cross it
Hmm.
and keep going, or we'd ambush it.
Got it.
Did they booby trap the trails?
No, because they used them.
Okay.
Mhm.
I found an occasional booby trap, but it was usually one that had been set outside of one of our night defensive perimeters. So I'd sneak in and rig a hand grenade or something, and then sneak off and hope that we'd detonate the trap.
Mhm.
So tell me what it's like sleeping in the jungle and how you prepared for when you made camp to, you had patrols and you had all sorts of things you had to do in order to sit down and rest.
Well, we moved. We didn't, because we stayed off trails. We only get about 1,000 kilometers a day because we were moving through some pretty thick brush, and and we pretty much go in single file. So the guy at the very front is called the point man,
Mm-hmm.
and he would be responsible for choosing the route. We knew where we were headed, and so the point man and the guy behind him would have a compass, and they'd keep us on a azimuth, on a compass heading. Because it was thick, a lot of times the point man was chopping his way through with a machete to get through the brush. Then there was the guy they called the slack man, which was behind the point man. And these procedures differ from unit to unit and from period to period. So what I'm describing is applicable to my unit, but it might not apply to a different unit or at a different time. So anyway, so normally right behind the point would be the platoon leader of the point platoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then not far behind the platoon leader of the point platoon would be the company command group, which was usually the company commander, the artillery forward observer, and some radio telephone operators, 2 or 3 RTOs. And then the rest of the company would be strung out behind them. So we had 3 platoons. So we're, the platoon leader would always move at the end of his platoon.
Uh-huh. But then how did you set? Oh, Emily.
How did we what?
Oh, no. Emily's going to ask a question.
I was just curious if you ever came across any wild animals.
Yeah, one of my squad leaders swore that he'd been harassed by an orangutan. He was absolutely, he would not say no. And he said that a couple of times. He says it happened to him a couple of times. We all thought he was crazy. But I mean, that part of the world does have orangutan, so we were never sure if he was blowing smoke or not. We saw a lot of reptiles. We saw, the lizards and snakes. Didn't see, other than Pete with the orangutans, I don't know that we saw any mammals.
Mm-hmm.
But saw a lot of insects and a lot of reptiles, and some of the birds. Birds were, you could hear them, you couldn't see them. But that's pretty much the sum total of our wildlife.
Yeah.
Some of the reptiles we found turned out to be very venomous.
Mm.
Fortunately, nobody got bitten.
That's good. I imagine I would be scared to sleep in the jungle with the thought of venomous reptiles.
Well, you get used to it. I mean, they don't want they say if you run across a reptile, it's because they didn't know you were coming. They don't want to be around you anymore. You want to be around them.
True.
So when you're making camp at night or whenever you get a rest period, what
You send out depending on whether whether you just stop in your column. If you just stop, you would put out one or two man listening posts or observation posts on either flank or on the flank of each platoon. If you were getting ready to set up for the night, you'd put out listening posts, security, and then you'd assign sectors to each unit, and they'd start digging holes. We carried de-handled shovels and pickaxes. So you'd start digging holes in your assigned sector, and you'd assign sectors of fire and whatever. Sit down and cook, eat your meal, and always have somebody on guard. But you could eat while you're on guard. It started to get dark. We slept under 4x8 ponchos that could be clipped together and made into a shelter half. So we string up a shelter half using ponchos, and usually slept 2 or 3 people to a poncho hooch. In my hooch, it was always shared by my radio telephone operator. He had the radio right next to him.
Mm-hmm.
You take your ammunition and your weapon and your helmet and put it next to your fighting position, so that if you needed to get up and get to your fighting position, all your stuff was already there. We'd also put out flares and claymore mines, directional anti-personnel mines, around our perimeter.
So then you would know before they got directly to you.
Well, the first night I spent in the bush is when that flare went off and tipped us off that we were next to a bunch of North Vietnamese. And that, there are a couple other things, but that's primarily it. I mean, you'd assign sectors, put out security, put out your anti-personnel mines and flares. Artillery, the Fort Observer would call in target location. So you would have defensive targets already plotted around your perimeter, so that if you got probed or attacked, you already had your planned artillery fire. He'd usually, because the maps were quite inaccurate, the last thing you did before you set up, the Fort Observer would have the artillery fire a marking round, and so you adjust from where the marking round was supposed to have hit and figure out what your actual grid location was on the map. And then and then he used that to plot the defensive targets.
Why were the maps so inaccurate? Was it?
Well, we're talking, this is the middle of nowhere. It's never been surveyed. So the maps are mosaics put together from aerial photographs, and the guys doing them are kind of inferring where the contour lines are. I mean, they can see the stream lines, but you have something on your map that says a hill is 400 meters tall. It might be 600 meters tall. You have no idea because it's never been surveyed. And we were operating in Cambodia, or along the Cambodian border. There were actually 3 borders. The Cambodians and the Vietnamese couldn't decide where the border was. So it was one border that said that the Cambodians claimed. There was another border that the Vietnamese claimed, and then there was someone who put a line on drawn the line on a map with a ruler and said for the U.S., this is the limit of U.S. operations. Don't go over this line.
Uh-huh.
At one time, because of some inadequate map reading, we ended up on the wrong side of all three of them.
Oh no.
So I
But-
didn't get my passport stamped. I could, I've been to Cambodia, but by mistake.
Did you guys run into the enemy, or was it just like purely a mistake and then you got right back where you needed to be?
Actually, we did run into the enemy. At that point, it was quite hilly, and we were on one side of a valley, and we saw flashlights going down a trail on the other side of the valley. And we started getting some override on our radio. And there's another broadcast close by that's more powerful. It'll bleed over into your frequency, and we were getting override of somebody speaking in what we thought was Vietnamese. So we called one of our Vietnamese scouts over and said, "What are they saying?" And he says, "I don't know. They're speaking Chinese." So that's the kind of thing we ran into in that part. We found their old night defensive positions. We found places where they had stopped and busted open ammunition boxes and handed out rifle grenades, stuff like that.
In your survey, you mentioned the Vietnamese Kit Carson Scouts.
Right.
And those are people that were former Viet Cong.
Some of them were. Some
Yeah.
of them were former Vietnam who had surrendered or changed sides. Our unit had a kind of a very mixed bag of scouts. We had one former NVA medic. We had a Montagnard who was a mountain tribesman, one of the indigenous tribes of Vietnam. We had a lot of South Vietnamese soldiers who didn't have to join the South Vietnamese Army if they could get a job as a Kit Carson scout. And they loved that because we lived a lot better than the Vietnamese Army did. We had a Cambodian. They got one of our scouts was a Cambodian. So all of whom they were all veterans. I mean, they'd been there fighting for years.
Yeah.
And we needed their expertise.
So they navigate the terrain somewhat.
Yeah, well, it was like in Iraq now they talk about the interpreters. Well, these guys weren't actually our interpreters, but they added the same degree of experience that we lacked. I mean, we had the guy that was the North Vietnamese medic. One of our soldiers had he got a splinter under his fingernail, and he got infected, which is really awful in that climate. And he went to our platoon medic, and he says, I don't know what to do about this finger, doc. It hurts like hell, and it's all red and inflamed. And the medic went and got the Kit Carson, and the Kit Carson operated on this guy's hand, and all the other medics came around and watched. And they were commenting and saying, "Look what he's doing now. He's doing a sterile field. Oh, wow. Look, he just, they were commenting on his technique. I mean, he'd been trained in North Vietnam by Russians, I guess, or Chinese, and he was pretty good at his job. And all our U.S. medics were in awe of him.
So was he serving as a medic, or was he serving as like a guide for you?
He's an employee of the United States government.
No, but I mean, like, was he a backup medic, or was
he was a scout? It's just it happened. His military specialty before he Chu Hoid was a medic.
Okay. Did you have any Oh, Emily's going to ask a question.
Sorry for our weird system. It just sounds like working with these different Vietnamese gave you a lot of practical help. And I was wondering if having a relationship with them also, I don't know, helped with a sense of purpose for American soldiers, in terms of why they were even in Vietnam, why they were there.
I don't understand the question. Ask the question again.
Okay, sorry. It just strikes me that they gave you all practical help, but I was wondering if you developed an emotional relationship with the Vietnamese.
Yeah, we did. We became friendly. Now, people moving, because of the constant rotation with the replacement system, you never really got real close to one of them. But yeah, we were friends.
Did that add to a sense of purpose for you all in terms of your mission?
At that point in the war, 1970 and 71, I don't think anybody really knew what our mission was.
Hmm.
I think, President Nixon said peace with honor. I think his mission was to get out of there before no one else got killed. One of my father's first cousins, who was another professional Army officer, World War II, a Korean veteran, Vietnam veteran, took me aside before I left and said, "Jamie, don't get killed. It's not worth it."
Mm.
And that's the last kind of guy that you'd expect to say that.
Hmm.
But so I don't think the 18 or 19-year-old draftee is thinking about the philosophical reasons for him being there. He's there because they sent him there, and his job is to do what he needs to do to stay alive.
Hmm.
Now, I have good friends, contemporaries, and who saw what they were doing as a honorable thing, and that they were there for the right reasons. And I know quite a few people that spent 2 or 3 tours in Vietnam that were really focused on the mission, trying to keep Vietnam as a non-communist nation, and hopefully root out some of the corruption and politics, that sort of thing. They were usually guys that had gone over in the early to mid 60s. People in my generation weren't exactly sure what we were doing there, other than what we were told.
Did you have a sense that it was more like you were trying to keep Vietnam stable, not necessarily kind of, win the war, but you were trying to kind of hold the lines?
Well, I think that was at the end. The program was called Vietnamization. It was to turn the war over to the Vietnamese, and the process that we had followed, I think, was to train the officer corps and the non-commissioned officers in the Vietnamese Army to be more effective, and to be more effective in combat. And we were doing a pretty good job of that. We focused mostly on their combat units, and when and where necessary, we provided the logistics. But there were some very effective South Vietnamese units in the Vietnamese Army in the 70s. I mean, they'd been at it for quite a while. They obviously they didn't have a choice, but they were very patriotic. The Vietnamese lost millions
Yeah.
of casualties, and you don't die for your country in that magnitude unless you're pretty dedicated to your country.
Yeah. So can you tell us about the time that you got shot in the leg?
Well, I took the jungle fatigues have cargo pockets, just like the cargo jeans you see now, and I had placed a magazine of M16 magazine in my trouser pocket, and we got into contact. When it was over, I felt this thing in my pocket and reached down, and the magazine was in there with a bullet in it, and there was a hole in the pocket.
You didn't even notice in the moment. It
No,
was
I
only
think
after.
it was a ricochet. I don't think it was I think
Mhm.
it already hit the ground and bounced up.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't until the smoke cleared that I found it. And I threw it away. I should have kept the darn thing, but I got rid of it. I was superstitious.
And you said that you had jungle foot, right?
Jungle rot? Yeah,
Jungle rot. That was kind of and you had to be treated for it,
right.
and that you received time to heal from it when you came back from Vietnam.
Right. Well, it's any cut will get infected, and if it gets infected bad enough, it'll create sores. If you get the big pustules, those kinds of things, open sores, pustules, just nasty stuff, boils.
And did you get to that point?
I did.
Oh, marching must have been fun.
Well, no, it wasn't, particularly with a 40-pound rucksack on your back.
So did you were you promoted to captain while you were in Vietnam?
Yes, while I was there. The way the promotion system worked in that time was that you could plan on spending 12 months as a second lieutenant, which is the lowest rank. You plan on being promoted to first lieutenant after 12 months, and then captain after 12 months as a first lieutenant. So normally, by the time we went to Vietnam, and we'd been in the Army a year, we'd already been promoted to first lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And then 12 months later, you made captain. So I made captain. I actually spent more than a year in Vietnam. I extended for several months, and I made captain during my extension.
So talk about the extension, because you're going to have a career in the military. I've heard of people extending to get out faster, but you're there. So was it something that you felt like you need to stay for the mission, like that you were,
Well, in 1971, we were beginning to withdraw units from South Vietnam, and they take them out by unit. I was in the last brigade of the 1st Cavalry to remain in Vietnam. The other 2 brigades had already rotated back to the States. So the 3rd Brigade, which was the one I was in, was operating as a separate brigade. But this is prior to having personnel management done by enhanced by computer. So all personnel management stuff happened by manually almost.
Mm-hmm.
So the replacements started to get fewer and fewer between. I mean, so we were running short of senior lieutenants and running short of captains in my battalion. My battalion commander asked me to extend. I was a company executive officer. I'd been in as an acting commander a couple of times when my company commander was on leave. So when I got ready to rotate back to the U.S., it's called DROS. I forget what it stands for, but when I got ready to DROS, the battalion commander said, "Would you consider extending and taking over Delta Company?" And I thought about it for a while and said yes, because one of the tickets you have to show on your officer's record is that you have had command time. You've been in command somewhere of something. And combat command time, if it's successful, looks really good on your record. So I thought, well, as a potential career officer, here's an example to get some combat command time. So I said, yeah, I'll extend for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And while I was on my extension, he flew in one day and promoted me to captain.
Oh. So while you're in Vietnam, you did you go on R&R?
I did.
Did more than once?
I went, while I was there, they authorized an R&R, and they also authorized a 7-day leave. So I went to Thailand twice, and when I extended, I got another R&R, so I went to Australia.
Mm-hmm. And how did you pick your locations for rest and relaxation?
Say that again?
Like rest and relaxation, what are you doing in Thailand and Australia?
What did I do in Thailand? What any single white healthy male would do in Thailand.
And were you able to go with other soldiers, or did you just go?
I went first on my first R&R. I went with a buddy.
Did you have much contact with your classmate that you guys came on the same flight? Did you ever see him around? Like, were you ever able to?
Say that again. I didn't understand.
Too fast. I was speaking too fast. Your classmate that you came over on the plane flight with, did you all ever see each other? Or I know you were.
No, he went to the 101st Division, which was in one of the northern provinces. I was in
Cambodia.
I did run into some VMI graduates that I knew while I was there, just by happenstance.
Were you ever able to you wrote with your family, but were you ever able to make phone calls to your family while you were over there?
It was doable. I never did. You'd sign up. They had something called Mars, not military something. You ended up talking on shortwave radio. But you signed up and got in line, and I didn't take advantage of that.
So in your survey, you said that your mother would send you Regency romances to read, and that you use that as an escape mechanism from the jungle. Did you? Did you share your books with the people in your platoon, or
if they wanted to read them, I said, anybody wants this book? Most of them didn't. It wasn't until she started sending Playboy and some of the more pornographic girly magazines that they were interested in what I was getting in the mail.
But you were single the whole time you were in Vietnam.
Say that?
You were single the whole time you were in Vietnam.
I was.
And then you said that your mom, that the local paper store person thought your mom was the coolest mom because she sent you those things for your. Yeah,
well, my mother, she's pretty much for character, never met a stranger. She'd go in the paper store and say, where are all your pornographic magazines? And this guy said, I don't know, Mrs. Totten, they're on the other side of the news rack. So if you went around, they had this little paper store had a rack, and on one side was, Holiday Magazine and Life and Newsweek and New York Times. And if you went around behind it, it had all the the more prurient ones.
Uh-huh.
I think she shocked him the first time she went behind it, started picking them out. And that that would make quite an impression on her.
Where was she living when she did this?
She's living in South Hamilton, Massachusetts.
Okay, so she was back in Massachusetts. What about, did you ever attend any USO shows or see any entertainers?
We had there was a system where they'd pull units out of the bush for a week and send them. In some cases, on the fire base, there was a place on the Benoit Army base, which was called the R&R Center, and it was surrounded by a triple strand concertina wire, and they put the guys from the bush in there, and they get to take hot showers, and there were snack bars and mess halls and stuff, so they get dried out and cleaned up and haircut, and they'd have USO shows, mostly not Americans. I mean, if somebody like Bob Hope came, then that was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But they'd have Filipino bands would come in and play, stand on the stage and play and stuff like that.
Did you ever have any donut dollies come to visit your group?
Yeah, Red Cross girls would fly out to the fire base. They'd walk around and smile and glad hand and have different activities, which was very welcome relief for the guys on the fire base.
Did you ever participate in one of their games?
Oh yeah. I forget what they were. It was silly games, but they're silly games being administered by a pretty girl to a bunch of horny GIs. That's guaranteed audience.
Yeah. Did you guys ever play any sports or anything to pass the time?
I think volleyball was one of the more popular sports on the fire base. I think they call it jungle rules. I mean, there weren't any rules. You just played volleyball. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no softball or football or anything like that.
And you said that that the holidays were you didn't really celebrate the holidays when you were in the bush.
It's another day of the week. They might fly in a hot meal.
Did you would your mom send any care packages for like holidays?
She sent me care packages pretty routinely. I don't think there may have been one that was specifically designed for a holiday. But, she could never anticipate when it would actually arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And what we got, the typical care package would be for anyone would have a lot of Kool-Aid in it, because the pure water purification tablets that you use to purify water, if you got it out of a stream or something, left a kind of a nasty taste in it. So you use Kool-Aid to camouflage the taste. So you get Kool-Aid. There probably still is dessert packs where you can get like a single serving of custard.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of those. A lot of guys would get those. I got my mother, the grocery store in South Hamilton carried a full line of SS Pierce food, which is, I don't know if you're familiar. I don't know if SS Pierce is even in business anymore, but they used to sell sort of canned version of gourmet food. So my mother would do things like she'd send me a can of steak and kidney pie.
Yeah.
Or kippered herrings, stuff like that, which my my platoon thought was kind of weird. So she did send me. She told me later. She started sending me when I first arrived in country, and at my first couple of weeks, I had heat rash and diarrhea. So I wrote my mother. She said, "Well, how are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing fine, except I got heat rash and diarrhea." So the next care package was full of baby powder and kaopectate. And by the time it arrived, I'd already gotten over all that stuff. So, and I couldn't use the baby powder because it had a very distinctive aroma, which would give you away in the bush. And I didn't need the kaopectate, so I gave the kaopectate to the medics. And then every care package thereafter had kaopectate in it. I couldn't figure out why she keeps sending me this kaopectate. Well, it turned out she was smuggling bourbon to me in the kaopectate bottle.
Oh.
I'd been throwing them away. So I got home. She said, "Did you get all the bourbon I sent you?" And I said, "What?" Oh. And so she was, she's an Army wife, Army mother. Army sister. She knew what Army guys needed.
Yeah. Did you, and in terms of like alcohol and drug use, I mean, did you witness?
Yeah, I did. I witnessed both. When we were on the fire base, we could buy beer and have it shipped out to the fire base. And so before we went on our 1 week oasis or siesta or oasis or whatever, we'd give we'd order what we wanted to drink while we were on the fire base, and we give the money to the first sergeant, and then they'd ship it out to us when we got there. I found several people smoking marijuana. Drug use in the rear areas is pretty awful.
Mm-hmm.
There was drug use in the field, but not as much, and it was mostly limited to marijuana.
And did you just kind of view it as something that happened, or did you just do disciplinary action against the people? Or
I caught them doing it. I disciplined them.
okay. So did you find the fire base more restful than being out in the bush?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I feel like in the survey you told, and when we talked earlier, you said that it was very loud on the fire base.
Well, the fire base is a fire base. So our fire base usually had a battery of artillery, 6 guns, at least maybe 3 guns, but normally 6. And we also had our mortar platoon, which was a 81 millimeter mortars on the fire base. So the way the strategy worked was they put a fire base somewhere, and they draw a circle around it, which the range of the different indirect fire weapons that were on the fire base. So we always operated inside the range fan,
Mm-hmm.
inside the fire base's range fan. But they, in addition to firing direct support for troops in combat, they also fired harassing and interdiction fires all night long. And so if they were shooting H&I fires at an extreme range, or if they were shooting it at all, it got pretty loud.
Mm-hmm.
And they shot them all night long.
But it felt safer than being out in the jungle. So, and you
Well,
had
yeah.
more.
I mean, you're surrounded by a 4 or 5 foot dirt berm that they pushed up with fighting positions located on it, and it's surrounded by barbed wire and directional mines. Something called fugas, which is a mixture of gasoline and ivory snow, which has the same consistency as homemade napalm. And so we put fugas directional mines in the wire, just in case.
So I'm going to review. Do you have anything you want to ask Emily?
No, I think most of the stuff that I was thinking about, you would go ahead and ask Laura. So
Okay. So you let's talk about you leaving Vietnam. Well, actually, can we go back? Because I remember in one of our prior conversations you talked about the ants and how you would wake up with ants.
Termites.
Termites, yes, termites. Can you talk about the termites and your sleeping arrangements?
Well, there's a lot of rotting wood laying around on the jungle floor, and there's termites there to eat it. And the termite colonies can get pretty extensive. And sometimes they'd build a little mound, and sometimes they wouldn't. But they lived underground. And if you happen to put your hooch on top of a termite nest, they come out at night and they travel in columns. You've seen ants moving in a line. Well, termites were like that too. And the way they kept in touch with each other was they touched the bug in front of them with their antenna. So you got sort of something that sounded like something sighing on the jungle floor, and it really was a termite column. And on one occasion, it woke me up. I said, "What the hell is that?" And my RTO said, "It's termites, sir. We're on a termite nest." And we all slept with our boots on, so I wasn't worried about getting my feet bitten. But my boots, my feet were extending over the edge of my air mattress. And the next morning, I woke up and there were termites embedded in my trouser legs, where they were. I guess I disturbed their migration. They didn't bite me, but those are the kinds of insects that you encounter.
Mm-hmm.
One time I got up in the morning. At first, I'd sit up at night in the dark. I got up the next morning and started putting together my sleeping system. And underneath the ground cloth that I'd been lying on, there was a hole about 3 or 4 inches in diameter. And I was sitting there looking at it, and the huge centipede or scorpion, I'm sorry, huge scorpion came out.
Oh.
And he is madder than a wet hen, because he'd been stuck in his burrow all night, and his habit was to come out at night and find something to eat. So it really got my attention that I'd spent the night on top of him.
Ugh. I guess but lucky though, you kept him where he was.
I'm very lucky. I mean, that was pure luck. But I've always since then I've had a very, very healthy respect for any venomous insect.
How were the race relations in your platoon?
The race relations?
Mm-hmm.
Race was not an issue.
Everybody was equal in the field.
If you carried your weight, you were treated with respect.
Was there any difference from when people were out in the jungle than when they returned to the fire base? I feel like I talked to someone and they said that once they returned from being in the field, that people were kind of allowed to be more in their own groups, and they kind of segregated.
They gravitate to their friends.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you leave Vietnam in 1971, right?
Yes.
And you head back, and then they send you to Fort Knox. No, they send you to Fort Dix.
That's correct.
From 71 to 73. And you're training, are you training people to go to Vietnam?
I'm training people that just come in the Army. I mean, in 71, there weren't very many of them going to Vietnam,
Uh-huh.
but basic combat training is basic combat training. You go through basic combat training, whether you're going to war or not. That's the first thing that happens.
Did you sense a different mood of the people that were going into basic training, combat training at that time compared to when you went through it yourself?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that was the only time I was in a basic combat training unit was as the draft was being eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
And because the draft was being eliminated, they amped up the recruiting to fill the ranks before this draft source disappeared. And we would get cycles. A cycle would be a company-sized group. It would be with us for an 8-week cycle. So we'd get cycles in that were all draftees. And normally they were great. They were young men who were getting ready, who wanted to go to college, or almost all high school graduates. They're just good citizens. Then occasionally we'd get a cycle of enlistees, guys that had enlisted. And quite a few of them enlisted because the judge told them they had to enlist or they were going to go to jail. So I had a couple of those. And so they were a lot more trouble. What they called regular Army cycles, the RA cycles, were a lot more trouble than the draftees.
That's interesting.
And I had RA trainees tell me, he says, "Sir, I joined the Army to get into drug rehab." I mean, I said, "What are you doing here?" We had another guy that had been in the Army, had been given a less than honorable discharge, had gone back out and re-enlisted under a fake name. And I said, "What are you doing?" When we figured it out, excuse me. When we figured it out, I asked him, I said, "Why'd you come back?" He said, "I want to get back into rehab."
So the Army rehabbed the soldiers. That was like a service that they would do.
If you've been in long enough, they'll give you medical treatment. What our job was, if they were in less than 180 days, they weren't qualified for any post enlistment benefits. So if we could identify the 8 balls within in basic training and get rid of them, we'd save everyone a lot of trouble. Because they would not be eligible for any of those other benefits.
Yeah. So then you went to school at Fort Knox in the armories.
Yeah, I went to the Army Officers Advanced course at Fort Knox. That was a 9-month course. And
then you did so well, they made you an instructor?
And I stayed on as an instructor in the Command and Staff Department. And then later, they activated an infantry battalion, actually an armor brigade at Fort Knox. And so I transferred over and was a supply officer for the infantry battalion.
Did you meet your wife at any point during this time? Oh, is Emily, did you want to ask a question?
I met my wife at Fort Dix.
Okay, you met your wife at Fort Dix.
Right.
And then she continued on with you wherever you went.
Right.
Did you have a question, Emily, or did I just...
Well, after we got married, I mean, when I got reassigned, she'd go in, they reassigned families.
Was your wife from a military family, or?
My wife's father was a retired Air Force officer.
So she was familiar with what?
She was, yeah.
And then so when do you go to graduate school?
Well, after I finished my stint as a student at the armor school, and was an instructor, I started taking night classes at the Fort Knox Education Center from the University of Southern California. So the University of Southern California had a program that they conducted off campus at military bases and even on ships at sea, where they would send out an adjunct professor, and you would spend you go to class 2 nights a week for 6 weeks, 3 hours a night. At the end of that 6 weeks, you would have completed one of the required courses for the degree that they'd set up. And if you didn't miss any 6-week sections, you could get a master's degree in 2 years.
And
So that's what I did. I have my USC diploma showing that I have a Master of Science degree, but I never set foot on campus at University of Southern California. I did it all at Fort Knox.
And that was in systems management.
Systems management, right? Which was a degree that was, I think, developed. It was a accepted, accredited degree, but it was sort of the Army version of an MBA.
Mm-hmm. So then you go to Alaska?
Yeah, I was stationed in Alaska for 3 years.
Did you want to go to Alaska?
Yeah, I asked to go to Alaska. My wife was still in the Army when we got married.
Oh, so what did she do in the Army?
She was a nurse. She's an Army nurse. That's how I met her. So when we got ready to leave Fort Knox, I said, you're ready to leave Fort Knox. And I said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I'd love to go to Alaska. And so we did. We were stationed at Fort Richardson, which is in Anchorage.
And you were a force development officer.
Right.
So is that recruitment or is that something else?
We were sort of the upper end of the personnel management and equipment management infrastructure. Some of the things I did, for instance, all of the cold weather equipment and tactics development takes place in Alaska. Fort Greely, Alaska, which is 100 miles from Fairbanks, is the home of the Co-Regents Test Center, and that's where they do a lot of equipment testing, sleeping bags, boots, that kind of thing. So one of my jobs in force development was I was the liaison with the combat developments branch in Alaska, and that we participated in a lot of the operational and developmental tests for equipment that was coming into the inventory. Our biggest deal was that while we were there, the Army adopted a tracked over snow vehicle, which we either were going to buy from Denmark or Norway. And they call them SUSV, small unit support vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ran the operational tests for the two different versions of over snow vehicles, which meant you just went out in the bush and turned them over to soldiers and see what the soldiers did with them. You never know, you know what they were designed to do, but you never know what they're going to end up doing with them once they get into the hands of the soldiers. So our job was to turn it over to the soldiers and watch what they did with them, and that was a lot of fun.
It does sound kind of fun.
Yeah, and one of the things we did, we would ski jor behind them, where they'd pull you behind them. You'd be on cross country skis, and they'd pull you behind them on a long rope, kind of like water skiing. Only there'd be like 20 guys on each rope. That was fun, except when you were going downhill and you'd start to overtake your tow vehicle. But so that was the kind of thing we did. We also provided evaluators for the Alaska Army National Guard, which was mostly Native Alaskans organized in all the villages up along the North Slope and in Southeast. So we'd go up to places like Barrow, Alaska, and Wainwright, Alaska, and train with the Eskimo Scouts.
Hmm.
And that was kind of fun. They're interesting people.
Yeah. What was that community like?
Well, these villages are basically subsistence villages. I mean, they live on what they can catch or shoot. They usually have a village store. The houses are. I mean, you've probably watched some of the reality programs on History Channel and stuff, and you've seen the board houses made of board, unpainted, sitting in the middle of a field of snow. Primary mode of transportation would be a snowmobile. That's usually they had a village school which was built by the government and staffed by the government. So you'd have non-Alaskan Native teachers in many cases in the schools teaching. I think in the 50s or in the 40s and 50s, they'd send all the children from the villages to a boarding school somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They stopped doing that, and they built schools in the villages themselves. So, in one instance, we flew into a village about 100 miles south down the coast from Barrow, Point Barrow, and they didn't know we were coming. Somehow or another, it got lost in communications. So we're kind of standing around on the airfield, which is about a mile outside the village, and there's nobody there. So finally, the villagers got together and they came out on their snow machines to see who it was that had just landed. And we said, well, they said, well, all the guys in our unit are out seal hunting. So I said, well, where can we spend the night? I said, we don't have a key to the armory, but we'll go see if they'll let you stay in the school. So we went and knocked on the door of the school, and one of the teachers came. And the teachers actually lived in the school. They were assigned; they wouldn't go out to the villages for a year at a time. These are all Caucasian, non-native teachers. Mm-hmm. And he said, there's 3 or 4 of us. We're here. The armory's locked. We need a place to spend the night. Can we stay here? And they said, sure, come on in. You can stay in the library. So we went in the library, and it was full of books on George Washington Carver and Martin Luther King and a lot of Black history. Mm-hmm. I said, to one of the teachers, she was young, she's maybe even younger than me. I said, here we are. We're up on the North Slope. I mean, we're above the Arctic Circle. Why is the library here full of books about Black history? And she said, we're federally funded. And because we're federally funded, we're required by law to teach Black history. But we don't. But the way they audit whether or not we're teaching Black history is if we order books for Black history.
Oh. So
we've ordered all these books, which are sitting in the library, sitting unread in the library, so we can get our federal funding. Another sort of interesting story about Alaska. During when Jimmy Carter was president, and we were having an energy crisis, he stipulated all federal buildings couldn't be air conditioned. They had a temperature range of how warm you could make them or how cool you could keep them. Mm-hmm. Central air conditioning, central heating. So one of the decrees was that all federal buildings had to be 70 degrees. And that they meant air conditioning. So you could only air condition your building in the summer months to 70 degrees. What that meant in Anchorage was we had to turn the heat on.
Oh Oh,
So,
dear.
so those are some of the more interesting unintended consequences of executive
Bureaucracy.
memos, whatever.
Yeah. So then you go from Alaska to Minnesota
Right.
and you work with the National Guard.
Right. The Army, and after Vietnam, one of the most expensive parts of any organization is personnel, and adding faces to the role of the armed forces is pretty expensive because you've got pay and benefits and retirement and all those kinds of things. So what the Army was trying to do was to integrate the reserve components to be more involved with the active components, and they created something called roundout units. So we were around, the unit that I advised in Moorhead was a roundout battalion for the 1st Infantry Division, which was located. 1st Infantry Division had 2 brigades at Fort Riley, Kansas, and 1 separate brigade in Europe. And the separate one of the brigades only had 2 battalions, so we were the 3rd battalion. We were a roundout battalion, but we were classified as the 3rd battalion for one of the 1st Infantry Division brigades. So we had a regular Army cadre there for training. We had all the same equipment, new equipment that the 1st Infantry Division was equipped with, and so it was called a high priority unit. So we were basically attached to the National Guard for pay and allowances, and we were operational control of the regular Army.
And then is that where you decided to go into the reserves?
Yeah,
After that?
I was very disillusioned during the post-Vietnam era. I became very disillusioned with the Army. I said, I don't think I want to do this the rest of my life. Now, I've been in about 13 years, and I was elected or selected to attend the Command and General Staff College, which is like getting a advanced degree in Army. The way the Army school system works, you go through specialized courses like Airborne and Ranger, but you go through branch training in the basic course, advanced course, and then the next level schooling is staff college. So you get selected to go to the Army Command and General Staff College, or you can go to one of the other services staff colleges, but they teach you how to be a staff officer. It's a 1-year course. I was selected, which was very complimentary. I mean, there's a fairly low selective rate. You won't be promoted past a lieutenant colonel if you haven't been to CNGS. Won't necessarily be promoted if you do go to CNGS, but you have to go to be promoted. I looked at how long I'd been in, and the fact that if I went to the school, I'd be in another year, and then I'd have a 2 or 3 year commitment, utilization commitment from having gone to school. I think I was in my middle 30s, and I just decided that I could still retire from the military if I transferred to the reserves and spent enough time in the reserves to be eligible for retirement. So that's what I did. I applied to 5 graduate schools, and when I was at the first one, when I received an acceptance to the first one, I submitted my resignation.
And Emily's going to ask a question.
Pardon me?
Emily's going to ask a question.
Okay.
Why were you becoming disillusioned with the Army in the post-Vietnam years?
I just didn't like the direction it was going. It was underfunded, overcommitted. discipline was lacking. I was very disappointed when we withdrew from South Vietnam, when we deserted the Vietnamese. I'm very disappointed in that.
After you returned from Vietnam, did people ask you about your service, or did you talk about your service very much?
No. I mean, we would, my contemporaries who were also Vietnam veterans, we wouldn't, necessarily spend a lot of time talking about it. We share a lot of the common experiences. Most of my civilian friends and relatives didn't go to Vietnam and hid out in school until it was over. And they didn't want to talk about it. I think they were a little embarrassed. And I think they looked at me with a degree of suspicion because of all the bad publicity that the military had gotten. I mean, you look at me and say, "Is this guy really a baby killer or what?"
What about?
Out there?
I'm sorry. What about your wife? Because she was in the military. Did you find a good companion to talk about things in her?
No, not necessarily. I don't talk about Vietnam. This is the most I've talked about Vietnam in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, some of the people we've interviewed said they've never talked to anyone about it before.
I usually, if I'm going to talk about something that happened in Vietnam, it's usually something funny, something entertaining.
Yeah.
Or gee whiz kind of thing. I mean, the thing about the termites, that's kind of a gee whiz story.
Well, it's palatable. People
Yeah,
can.
I mean, nobody wants to hear about firefights and, B-52 strikes and those kind of things.
Well, I mean, I think that people do need to hear about it because, like you said in your survey, like with Iraq and Afghanistan and the Ukraine, I mean, we're facing similar challenges and we need to look and learn from what we did.
Well, I think in the years since Vietnam, Vietnam veterans have become more accepted by the general public. And I think that 9/11 really was a watershed moment for support of the military.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot more support for the military now than there was 50 years ago. At one point, when I lived in Tennessee, everybody I knew in Hendersonville knew someone who was either on their way to the Middle East or just come back. And that's not the case when Vietnam was going on. My upper middle class friends on the North Shore didn't know anybody that was even in the military except me.
Yeah, one author calls Vietnam the working class war. Do you think that's a good way of
Yeah, I think so.
characterizing it?
The way the draft system was organized, if you had the means, you didn't have to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like when during the Civil War, you could, if you were drafted, you could pay someone to go in your place. That's almost, very similar in effect that was going on because of car deferments and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, on your return from Vietnam, did you wear your uniform on your flight back? Did you experience any comments when you were returning home?
I wore pajamas.
Going the comfortable route. That's good.
Right. So I came back on a MAC flight, Military Air Command. Went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and I didn't put a uniform on again for 2 months.
Did it feel Did it feel strange to you?
What, putting the uniform on?
Yeah.
Not really.
No. But I mean, did you want to have like, it sounds like you were kind of like on a detox of military, you know.
Yeah, it was a good opportunity to unwind.
Did you do anything fun? I know that war is not fun, but you did get hazard pay and combat pay. And then when you come back, you know, you've been living, the military has been basically sustaining you. You haven't really been paying bills or, you know, things of that nature, that daily rigors of life. Do you know what I mean? You're not paying your electric bill. You're not paying your, you know, did you
True.
do anything fun with the money that you had gained, you know, been paid from the Army during your time in Vietnam?
Well, bought a car, I guess. I don't know. I started skydiving. I had a little difficulty connecting with young women because I had kind of a different attitude than most of the people they knew. But I managed to enjoy myself
Mm-hmm.
while I was on leave. I bought a motorcycle, which I then promptly crashed. Can't think of anything else.
Mm-hmm. So you went into the reserves, and then when did you start your MBA?
Well, when I left active duty,
Uh-huh.
I went directly to Charlottesville and started my MBA.
Okay.
And while I was in Charlottesville, I petitioned to join the reserves and did, and they transferred, they commissioned me in the Army Reserve at the same rank. I was a major, and I did that for 8 years. I was in the Army Reserve for 8 years.
Mm-hmm. And was it enough of a buffer that you didn't feel so disillusioned, or did your feelings about the military and its trajectory continue through your reserve service?
Well, one of the reasons when I was stationed in Moorhead, when I was assigned as an advisor, I realized that the unit that I was advising was as good or better than any of the units I had been assigned to on active duty. So I had a lot of respect for the reserve components. So I didn't have a problem transferring into the reserve components from active duty. And I did the kind of things that you do when you're in the reserves. You know, I took correspondence courses. I went annual training. You go to annual training for 2 weeks every year. You go to weekend drills. You know, all those kinds of things.
Can I ask a question, Laura?
Mhm.
I was just wondering if you experienced or witnessed any discrimination against Vietnam veterans or any hostile treatment.
I did. You know, in the 70s for sure, 70s and 80s.
Are you willing to give us an example?
Well, an example would be my uncle, who was very outspoken, had a bumper sticker on his car. He commanded the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam quite successfully. He had a bumper sticker on his car with the 11th ACR insignia, and the saying is, "These colors don't run." And while he was at my mother's house at a get together, somebody came and scratched it off his bumper.
Mm.
And we're talking about upper middle class, college graduate girls and boys.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, so you talked about in your initial, when you wrote us into the initial questions that we asked the people to submit to be for the oral history project, you mentioned that the newspaper and the media's interpretation of the Vietnam War was very disillusioning.
They had an agenda and they followed it. I can give you a good example.
Okay.
It was kind of a crisis in that I was a company executive officer. My company was on the fire base, and I went out. I was normally stationed in Benoit, but when the company's on the fire base or on log days, I'd go out to the field. So I was on the fire base with my company. A typical afternoon, not much going on. And the battalion reconnaissance platoon got in very heavy contact with a North Vietnamese unit. And they called my company and said, we're gonna go out, we're gonna send some people out to reinforce the recon platoon. So get your guys together. So I, organized a combat assault. Got it organized, made sure everybody knew where they're going, what they're doing. I didn't go, but we sent a platoon out to reinforce the recon platoon. And about a week or 2 or 3 later, there was a vignette on CBS News. You've probably seen it, of some troops smoking marijuana by the water point at that fire base, and they were my guys, and they'd all hid when we were getting ready to send people out to reinforce the recon platoon. These 5 or 6 guys had disappeared, so to speak. And there was a CBS reporter and cameraman on the fire base while this was going on. So the newscast had the prelim was, here we are in South Vietnam, not much going on. This guy's getting a haircut, and so forth and so on. And oh, by the way, look at all these guys smoking dope at the water point. And no mention of the fact that we had just bounced a platoon into reinforce somebody in really heavy contact. So the message was, the war's over, guys. They didn't talk about first platoon and the recon platoon being in a big firefight. I mean, all of fire bases within range of this particular contact shot almost the entire basic load in support of our guys. So there was some really heavy stuff going on. This reporter completely ignored it all and took pictures of smoking dope. What we found out later, that he'd given them the dope to smoke. So that was the news media that I saw firsthand. A year or so later, at the advanced course, we had the editor of the New York Times come and address us. We had a once a week we get together and get some sort of presentation. And this particular week, we got the New York Times, and everybody in my class at the advanced course was a Vietnam vet. And you could feel there was a lot of animosity in the air when this guy got up. And he talked about how the government lied and the Army lied and so forth and so on. And these guys are all thinking to themselves, talk about lying. We've seen it. So after the presentation, we got back together in the classroom, and I said, that was a lot of, that guy is, I was very angry. And I said, I have one firsthand account where the media just flat out lied, and it made made the evening news, and everybody in my class had a similar experience with the media.
And you feel like it contributed to the general feeling of, we need to get out of Vietnam and not support this any further.
Yeah, that was the general feeling. I mean, the war's over. That was the message. The war's over. And I think about 1974, I think Congress stopped funding Vietnamese, and shortly thereafter, it all collapsed.
Emily wants to ask a question.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay, sorry. So what do you feel like the biggest misconception about the war is?
Well, if you go back to while the war was going on, and you hear stories over and over and over again about people getting off an airplane in uniform and having people line up and spit on them and call them baby killers and that kind of thing. Those are big misconceptions of how we conducted ourselves in Vietnam. I think that if you read military history, you'll find that there was a lot of government interference with how the war was fought. I mean, there were times when the president had to okay an airstrike. What I think the general image of the Vietnam veteran at the time was of some kind of inhumane thug.
Mm-hmm. So after changing gears, after you get your MBA at UVA, and then you start working in the textile industry.
I went to work for Burlington Industries.
Mm-hmm. Did you find any of the skills that you had gotten through the U.S. Army helped you in your work?
Management skills, organizational skills.
So then you retire from the industry, right? And then
Right, textile industry.
And then you and when you retired from the military, you were a colonel.
Right.
But then you found a company after retirement?
Well, we two of my cousins and I changed what's known as a family office to a registered private trust company, and we capitalized it. It was basically a financial management, wealth management, multifamily office where we'll do your estate planning, we'll manage your money, we'll do your taxes, all those kinds of things. It's a one-stop shop for a family, not for the general public.
Oh.
And we realized about a year into this, we said, family's growing exponentially and the money's growing linearly. And we're going to have to shut this place down because pretty soon we're going to have the pie cut in so many slices that no one slice will mean anything. So we changed it into a registered private trust company, which is allowed to, and as a private trust company, you don't come under SEC jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want SEC jurisdiction. So we changed it to a private trust company in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire and North Dakota have the rules, the most favorable rules for that kind of operation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're chartered in New Hampshire. We're a non-custodial trust company with offices in Massachusetts.
Oh. So is that kind of how you spend part of your retirement? Is working on that?
Yeah, I ran it for about a year.
Uh-huh. Well, that's interesting. It's kind of like corporations always being chartered in Delaware because it's
Yeah,
the
exactly. And what we found was that New Hampshire doesn't fool around. I mean, the New Hampshire Banking Commission comes down and audits us every year. And we audit ourselves. I mean, we have an outside auditor comes in and does what they do. So they make sure that we are following all the best practices.
Did your wife serve in Vietnam at all, or was she
No,
stateside?
no.
She was,
And actually, that's my first wife. We divorced in 85, 86.
oh, okay.
I remarried in 87. So, and my current wife was never married to me when I was on active duty.
Oh. Do you think that any of the Vietnam War experiences, did that affect your marriage in any way?
In fact, in my first marriage,
Uh-huh. Do you think it would like PTSD or anything?
well, that's interesting. I didn't know I had PTSD. I just thought I had a bad attitude. My current wife, Jody, was watching a newscast about a murder that occurred somewhere back in the probably early 90s. And it was a woman had stabbed her boyfriend and shot him, and then said it was PTSD. It was on CNN or Fox or something.
Mm-hmm.
And Jody was watching it, and they put the accused murderer on the stand, and the defense or the prosecution was asking her about her claim that she was suffering from PTSD, and he started asking her a bunch of questions. And are you easily angered? Well, yes. Are you easily startled? Yes. Those kinds of questions. And he went down the list of all the symptoms of PTSD, and I answered yes to every one of them.
Mm.
I thought, wait a minute, maybe I have PTSD, and it turns out I did.
Did you go to VA, and did they help you at all with
No,
that? Or
I went. My wife and I both went through counseling with a local counselor.
Well, I mean, it's always good to get some of that stuff out. And
it surprised me. What PTSD wasn't even a diagnosis when I came home from Vietnam. Everybody just thought the guys that were having trouble adjusting were just just need to get over it. They didn't realize it was an actual condition.
Yeah. Well, you seem very high functioning. Like given your resume and everything that you accomplished after the Vietnam War, it seemed like you accomplished a lot.
I'm just trying to keep my head above water, pay the bills.
Were there certain things that triggered the PTSD? Did you identify certain things?
One of my I was very judgmental. If somebody did something that I disapproved of, I said, that's because you're an idiot. Which I've learned is not okay. But what people doing things that I considered to be stupid would make me angry. And particularly in basic training, you're kind of surrounded by people who are not high functioning. And so I spent a lot of time being angry at that. But I think my anger was how it manifested itself the most.
Mm-hmm.
But as you can tell, I'm just a sweetheart guy now.
Yeah, you're a teddy bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have interviewed a prisoner of war, and the thing that triggered PTSD the most for him was the jangle of keys, hearing it. Because anytime a guard would come and open his door, he didn't know what he was going to get as a prisoner. And so then when he was home and he'd hear the jangle of keys, that would be the thing that would most.
Well, you do have sensory memory. And I can remember when we lived in Alaska, we lived in the community. We didn't live on post. On my house, my neighborhood backed up to the Chugach Forest, Chugach Mountain. So when you crossed the power line behind our housing development, you were in the bush. And I always, if you went outside anytime after about the 1st of May, you pretty much had to bathe in mosquito repellent. If I get in a certain surroundings and I smell mosquito repellent, I have flashbacks to Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of things. The kinds of things that might give me a flashback don't normally happen in the United States of America. There's no there's no plastic explosive smell here, fortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But
Have you
hearing helicopters
Mm.
will sometimes give me a little bit of a jolt.
Mm-hmm.
have you thought about returning to Vietnam at all?
I have, and I think there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of U.S. history there. I haven't. There's a lot of places I'd like to go. I think Vietnam isn't at the top of the list, but I would consider it.
And have you been to the memorial in DC?
I've been to the memorial.
And do you have any rituals that you like to do to memorialize the people that were lost, like on Memorial Day or, Veterans Day?
I don't participate in any formal rituals.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about the Vietnam War Memorial in DC when they unveiled it? Did you think it was appropriate?
Yeah, I couldn't get. I was a little shocked by the fact that a lot of people had a negative reaction to the fact that the architect was an Asian woman.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, we don't want to. We resent the fact that they picked her design because she's Asian. And I thought, that's bullshit. She's American.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that it encapsulated sort of the mood.
Yeah, I think it's really grown on people over time, it seems like.
It was very moving, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is there anything that I have not asked you that you wish that I would ask you?
I think you pretty much covered the bases.
Well, I'm just thankful for you for giving your time and your experience and allowing us to document it so that hopefully in the future people are going to have a greater understanding, or even now currently Emily and I are getting a greater understanding of the Vietnam War through you, but I think it'll serve dividends in the future to for future researchers, and so we really thank you.
Well, there's a lot, the Vietnam veterans are receiving a lot more respect than they did 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people are beginning to come to grips with the veterans' experience as opposed to what they were told, if they were alive at the time, what they were told about the war. So you hear a lot more people talking about it with pride. You see a lot more old guys like me wearing hats with Vietnam vet on it, stuff like that.
Yeah, if you, I guess sorry, I'm I'm stammering.
It's okay.
If you wear a hat that says Vietnam on it, do you want people to come ask you about it or say anything about it?
I don't wear the hat.
Okay.
I mean, people say, usually when they find out that I'm a retired Army officer, they say, "Did you go to Vietnam?" And I say, "I did." What was it like? Well, just like what you might expect. I intentionally don't go into a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
What I find is that people that want to talk all about their Vietnam experience probably didn't go.
Mm-hmm.
And I've known several like that. I mean, I know the guy that I said, "What unit were you in?" "Well, I can't remember." I said, "How you can't remember what unit you're in? Give me a break."
I know there's that book by William Burkitt where he unveils all these fake Vietnam veterans who have gotten like big TV specials and, all sorts of,
Right.
they
Well, they had a bunch of them testify in Congress that had never even been in the military.
yes, it's incredible.
And that was a pure T invention by the anti-war lobby to smear the reputation of the veterans.
The testimony.
Yeah. Which, by the way, was organized by Senator Kerry.
Yeah, the Winter Soldier investigation.
Right. Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he threw his medals on the Capitol steps, and then later, when he was running for president, he says, "Oh, those weren't my medals."
Yeah. What do you think motivated people later, though, like after the war was over? What do you think motivated people to pretend they were veterans at that point?
Thinking that it reflected well on themselves, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They call it stolen glory.
Yes, stolen glory.
Maybe they're a little embarrassed they didn't go.
Uh-huh. It seems like an odd mix of wanting to be seen as a hero and a victim almost. It's a strange.
I have a acquaintance, I should say, who very outspoken, pretty liberal. He's actually a disc jockey, my age, and he felt compelled to tell me why he didn't serve in Vietnam, because he's a direct descendant of the Lee family in Virginia. And he wanted me to know why I didn't serve in Vietnam. And I said, when you're all done, Sam, it sounds like you just felt like you were too good to go. And that really upset him. He had a long and convoluted rationale that just said that I'm too good to go there. So I think a lot of people felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you have any more questions, Emily?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful answers.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thanks for reaching out.